Hello and welcome to NAS Compares. If you're watching this video, chances are it's either because you've bought yourself a brand new Asustor NAS or you're on the fence and you're just about to and you want to know exactly how you'd set one up. Now, about 2 years ago, myself and Eddie here at NAS Compares, it's just us here, we made a full 7 to 8 part series on setting up your Asustor NAS perfectly right out the box. However, that was more than 2 years ago at the time of recording, and things have changed. The software ADM has improved vastly, and alongside changes in security credentials, shared map protocols, and how the system actually works in the GUI, the good, the bad, and the ugly, I thought it worth now, a couple of years on, revisiting the subject of setting up one of these devices for the first time, and I'm going to be guiding it through with you over a series of videos. Now, this first part is going to be the physical setup and setting up your RAID and the software at the base level. Later videos that are going to be coming out hopefully every other week are going to be touching on setting up your shared storage, setting up your volumes, and setting up a lot of the multimedia, setting up the indexing, setting up the whole system, including security, failover, backups, and more, right the way through from beginning to end. But bear in mind, we're going to be talking pretty much at this pace. If that annoys you, along the bottom of the screen there are chapters, and you can go ahead and press that button down there. There's times 2.5 speed divided by YouTube that allow you to speed things up considerably. But I'm going to be delivering things in the most chewable, user-friendly way possible to make sure everyone's covered. So again, this is going to be the pace on this. So depending on which Asustor NAS you go for, you're going to have one of two different versions. If you're a recent joiner of the Asustor NAS family, you may be looking at the Flashstor series. This is a system that is built predominantly around the use of M.2 NVMe SSDs. Now, you may also be looking at things like the Drivestor, the Lockerstor series, and the Nimbustor series. These are devices that use 3.5-inch media and M.2 NVMe storage. Now, I'm going to be focusing on both of them as much as I can, but bear in mind that some of the steps in these videos are going to apply to one or the other, and I will signpost that for you there. But just remember that on the whole, the majority of the steps apply to both of them. There's just going to be the odd distinction between them. So what are you going to need to set up your Asustor NAS for the first time? Well, depending on the system you go for, again, whether it's a desktop or it is a flash optimized SSD focused system, you're going to need different kinds of media. In the case of the desktop devices, Lockerstor, Drivestor, and Nimbustor, you're going to be looking at 3.5-inch storage media. You can, if you choose, opt for 2.5-inch media, but you will need a screwdriver to install these in those individual bays there, and the different screws that are included with your Asustor package there. Again, you get more storage for your hard drives. The SSDs are faster, but generally have a lower price per terabyte and have smaller overall capacities available. It's also worth highlighting whether you go for a 2-bay device like this or scale up to larger devices in the Asustor family. In the case of all of these devices, you do not need to fully populate the device on day one. You can run these with as little as a single drive, but I strongly recommend at least 2 drives, because that allows you to take advantage of RAID, redundant array of independent disks, a system that combines multiple drives into a single storage pool if needed, and then you can spread the data across it, and in the event of a drive failing, depending on the RAID configuration you choose, you can recover that data in a way that if all your data was on one disk and that drive died, you'd lose all of that data. There's more complexity to that, but more on that later in the video. Now, if you're looking at one of the Flashstor series, you're going to be looking at M.2 NVMe's. Now, in the case of this installation, I'm going to be installing 5 M.2 NVMe's in this system. And in the case of this 2-bay system here, I might go ahead and put in just 1 drive to show you in a future video how to add storage later on. A very useful feature for later in your system's life. But nonetheless, both of these systems allow you to put in 1 or 2 drives at the beginning and scale up later down the line, and that allows you to leverage how much you're going to spend on both the system and the storage on day one. If you don't think you're going to need all that storage immediately, scale back on the spending of the storage, because you can add up later on and add more. But again, it's all down to your preference. Other things you're going to need are included in your Asustor accessory package. Things like your external network cable or your external PSU. Again, it will differ depending on the system you use, but all of those options will be included. And that's really it. You may need a screwdriver for 2.5-inch media, and in the case of the Flashstor, to access the inside, but that's really everything you're going to need. So let's go on to the physical installation on both of these devices. Now, the installation of media across both of these devices will differ. We'll start with the Flashstor series. Now, at the moment, at the time of recording, there is the Flashstor 6 and the Flashstor 12 Pro. That means on the 6, you have 6 bays of storage accessible on the base, and in the 12, you have the same 6 storage bays and another 6 there on the top. So, at least for this device, what we're going to do is go ahead and access the storage area for those M.2 NVMe's. There are 4 screws located on the base of the system. These 4 screws, once removed, allow you to slot away the cover that has a fan assisted panel that lives above each of the storage drives in there. That fan is in there to ensure not only the system is kept cool, but obviously the NVMe's themselves. M.2 NVMe's provide a greater degree of performance compared with that of hard drives, but with that there is a trade-off in terms of the temperature they can reach. Now, in the case of this system, as discussed previously by Asustor themselves in some of their catch-up videos, even though this system has a number of M.2 NVMe's inside, they don't supply heat sinks. The reason they don't supply heat sinks like these for each of the individual bays is each of those bays is limited to ×1 speed. And that ×1 speed, because the lower performance, means that the drives don't get as hot, which can lead to degradation on drives. That's why they don't include heat sinks. Now, other Asustor products may arrive with faster M.2 NVMe slots, and for those, depending on the height of the performance, then heat sinks may be required. Now, there are our 6 drive bays there on the top, and the installation of NVMe's inside this is painfully simple. I want you to load from this side here in slot number 1, and then angle your M.2 NVMe with the label facing front. No need to remove the storage label there on the front, and pull back there the clip at the top, and each of the drives go in very easily. Repeat that step for each of the NVMe's you're putting inside. I'm going to be leaving one of these slots blank because in a later video I will be showing you how to expand the storage for later on when you add more drives. Bear in mind that you can't do hot swapping on this. Hot swapping is when you introduce a new drive when the system is still powered on. In the case of the Flashstor, because it uses M.2 NVMe's, these by their design do not allow you to just introduce drives randomly as you can on here, and you'll need to power down the system when introducing new drives. Perhaps a future version of the Flashstor series will arrive with E1S drives that allow you to hot swap drives later on. But that's the installation of those drives, and again, if you do wish to access the other side on your Flashstor 12 Pro, you need to remove the 2 screws located here and here on the rear of the casing to access the other 6 bays. But once they're installed, go ahead and replace that slot there and put those screws back in. Now, I'll do that in just a moment. But if we move over to the desktop system is similar, but with a few little changes. When it comes to the installation of storage media, it will differ on the system you use. So in the case of this system here, known as the Drivestor series, the Drivestor series arrives with click and load trays. So click and load trays like this one allow you to take a storage drive, take the storage media, place it label face up with the connector out, and it allows you to click and load that tray in, therefore not requiring any kind of screwdriver there. However, in the case of the Lockerstor series, you will need to go ahead, eject the individual tray, and this requires drives to be screwed in. 2.5-inch media like these SSDs required to be screwed in there on the base, but in the case of hard drives, you will need to take the hard drive, install it in the bay as shown earlier, with the label at the top and the connector faced out, delicately put the drive down on a table, and then align the screw and the screw holes up on the side. And then using the 4 screws on either side, 2 on each side I should say, you're able to screw in your brand new drive and install that inside your Asustor. Once you've screwed that drive in, you can slot it directly into the available slot on your Asustor NAS. Bear in mind, a number of different solutions from Asustor also provide the option to lock these individual trays. I'll tell you right now, those locks, much like a lot of the brands out there, do not live up to serious removal. If someone wants to get to those drives, they will. Those locks are in place to stop you accidentally removing a drive. It could be that one of the drives has failed. It could be that you accidentally just knocked the drive, knocked something on the corner of the table, who knows. But ultimately, these exist to stop you accidentally removing a drive and potentially destabilizing your entire RAID. Now, another thing worth highlighting while we remove this drive here is that some Asustor systems, again, like the new Nimbustor Gen 2 or the Lockerstor Gen 2 series, also benefit from M.2 NVMe's located inside the system. These allow you to not only install slower, larger storage hard drives, but they also allow you to install the NVMe's that we talked about just now, available on the Flashstor series. That means systems like the the Lockerstor series and the Nimbustor series benefit from dual storage architecture. Those M.2 NVMe's can be used for caching, which allows faster uploads and downloads from your system of specific files in the case of read caching, or you can use them as storage pools. Indeed, you can even use them as both. So you can go ahead and, much like the installation on the Flashstor, go ahead and install M.2 NVMe's in the available slots inside this system. And again, if you use them for storage pools, you'll be able to have faster data transmission on the areas of storage there, which is also beneficial of things like containers and virtualization. Otherwise, if you use it for write caching, it means when data is uploaded to the system, it writes to the SSD and then in the background move to the hard drives. And with read caching, more frequently accessed files of a smaller incremental tiny nature, small IOs, will be copied to the SSDs. So later on, when that frequently accessed data is required, it will pull from the faster SSDs rather than the slower hard drives. The next step is connecting a device up to your local area network and deciding about whether you want to give it internet access. So straight away, regardless of whether you're going to go for a desktop system that uses hard drives or one of the Flashstor systems that allow you to focus on M.2 NVMe's, you're really going to only have one of two main options. You're going to take the Ethernet cable that your system arrives with and connect it to the rear of your system. So in case you can see there, connect it in. Now from here, you've got a couple of different options. Option number one that I think a lot of home and domestic users will use is to go ahead and grab their router. This is the device provided either by your internet service provider or a relative that knows their stuff. This is where the internet comes into your home. From here, you've got physical connections there on the rear of the device, and you can go ahead and connect it into the base of that device. However, bear in mind that one, you are now connecting this device to an internet access point. There will be firewalls, there will be protection, and indeed there are numerous security measures built into Asustor's platform. But for a lot of users, when it comes to security and indeed sharing the device on the local area network, they choose not to go ahead and connect their NAS directly to their router. What they opt for is to use a network switch. Now, this is a really enterprise model. This thing goes for about 700 or 800 quid, but you can pick them up for as little as $15, even $10 if you shop around. Not like this, but much smaller form versions. And with a network switch, you connect your NAS to a network switch, and then this connects via a cable to your router. Why would you do that? Number one, it allows all the local area network users to be able to access the NAS in a far more controlled fashion, and it allows the bandwidth to be better provisioned and controlled by the network switch, either automatically or manually by yourself if you know what you're doing. But moreover, it creates a partition between the internet connection and your local area network. You can create sufficient protocol, create things called VLANs, virtual land area, local area network, that allow all the devices here to not access the internet if you don't want them to access it, which a lot of users may wish to. A lot of users aren't even aware of the fact that you don't even need the internet to use a NAS. You can utilize the system purely on the local area network with no internet access. You just need, at least the first time, to connect an internet connected device such as a PC, a Mac system or a mobile to connect with the device automatically via the local area network, download on that device the latest firmware that I'll show you later on, and upload it to the system. After that, you can sever this device's internet connection permanently if you choose. Just stay on top of those software updates. But apart from that, that's really how to connect this device. once you've connected the device either to your router or a network switch, you need to go ahead and connect the power. Now again, depending on your Asustor NAS, the power may be directly into the system with an internal PSU or using an external power brick like this. The majority of power bricks will have a small LED that when you connect the power, like so, will produce a green light to indicate that the PSU is healthy and supplying power there. The order at which you want to connect these two components, everyone does it their own way. There's pros and cons either side, but that's really it. We've now got our system connected both to a local area network and with power. Now we simply need to power the device on. There's our light, and the system is powered on. If there is a fan, the fan will kick in. If you're using mechanical hard drives, there will be a brief period at the beginning where the system will do internal checks before it boots up the hard drives, but ultimately this will take somewhere in the region of 30 to maybe 120 seconds to begin that initialization, and then from there we'll need to log into our local area connected Mac or Windows system in order to continue with the software installation there. So we're going to make our way over there and connect to the system. But just before we do so, it is worth highlighting, we've made a whole dedicated video on this, that if you are using some Asustor systems that have an LED panel on the front, so the larger versions of the Lockerstor series have that. That was a loud beep, wasn't it? If you use larger Lockerstor systems that have an LCD panel on the front, if you connect this device to the internet, and even you don't have to do that if you don't care about the latest firmware, you can even set up the device just using the LED panel, and it will create a automatic setup of the storage pool and of the volumes just by using the LCD panel there. But just bear in mind, you will probably need to connect it to the internet if you want to take advantage of the latest firmware there. And I personally would still recommend utilizing a desktop computer to manage the installation manually, but it is an option open to you, and we do have a video on that. Let's make our way over to the desktop and continue the software installation and RAID setup. Proceeding with the installation of the latest software and creating your RAID will differ ever so slightly at this stage depending on whether you want the Asustor NAS to have any kind of internet connectivity. Now, one of the tools I strongly recommend you install straight out of the gate is to go into the Asustor download section and download the Asustor Control Center application. Again, this is available for Mac and Windows, and the Asustor Control Center application not only allows you to search your local area network to find the Asustor NAS, but on top of that you can utilize it for mapping network drives and running other services after you've got the system set up. If you don't want to use their application and want a more general network search application, I'd recommend utilizing Advanced IP Scanner. It's a free tool that you can use to scan your whole local area environment, and if you've got things such as IP cameras, other NAS devices or other network devices that you want to be able to map using their IP, this is a great tool for a broader and less brand specific means to search your local area network. But nevertheless, for the rest of this guide, we're going to be focusing on using the Asustor application. Alongside that, in the download section, depending on if you want to set up the device to have no internet connectivity, I still recommend downloading the very latest version of their software. Scroll to the bottom of this page and you'll find ADM. From there, you'll be able to download that to your local PC system, and from that local PC system, later on, you can upload it onto the Asustor NAS. Opening up the Asustor application, as you can see here on screen, I've already searched my local area network using the scan functionality, and it's found that NAS, stating as uninitialized. In other words, it's ready to go. Just click uninitialized and a new tab will open up on your web browser. This tab on your web browser will guide you through the installation process, but bear in mind later on in this, there is going to be an option to do it automatically or manually, and I will be choosing automatic. Next up, as you can see here, it's going to invite you to either download the latest version of that software or manually update the version that you downloaded earlier on. Or you can skip both of those and go straight into the installation. But I strongly recommend that you ignore that third option because you need to have the latest software, not only to take advantage of the latest firmware and software updates and, tweaks and improvements to ADM, but also for the sake of your security. But I'm going to go ahead and upload that latest version of Asustor's ADM software. From there, we click Next. and now the system will upload from my local PC that version of ADM onto the NAS and then install that software and then bring us back into the system so we can continue the initialization there. Again, if you download it, you're going to see exactly the same thing, but the amount of time it takes may be a fraction longer. Once the upload is finished, as you can see, the system will restart and you'll hear it beep in the background. The restart can take anywhere from 1 to 3 minutes, and we'll fast forward now to the rest of the installation. Now, once the system has fully booted, you can see here that the GUI via that same IP address there in your web browser is now showing the terms and conditions. Again, you can read through it if you like, you can scroll past it if you like. I don't own your life. But moving forward, you can see from here, you'll now be guided into some of the installation steps. You can choose light or dark mode there. I'm not going to fiddle around with that too much. But you can also choose whether you want to go for a one-click setup or a full custom setup. Now, I am going to opt for the full custom setup and guide you through it. But if what you care about is just knowing that the storage media inside is all pulled together with one disk of RAID protection or a failover drive, and the volume already created occupies all the storage, if that's what you care about, then just click one-click setup because it will do all of that. But for the rest of you that want to know a little bit more about what we're doing, I'm going to go ahead and select a custom setup. The first thing it's going to do is ask you to name the server. You can keep the name as it is or give it the name that you wish. If you're going to have multiple NASs on your local area network, then that name will have to differ. Ignore that noise in the background. That's another NAS. Next, we have to give our account a name. Now, I am putting the name admin there. You don't need to. And also, the actual admin, the powerful admin account on this system is disabled by default. You are creating a super user here that has access to pretty much all of the day-to-day operations of this, but it's still not powerful enough that if it fell into the wrong hands and they were accessing the back end of this system, it would give them the true access that the full admin and root command level stuff. It would give them most of it, but not all of it. Next, we need to create a password for this system. Again, it's up to you how strong you want to keep it. Again, if you're going to create multiple users on this, it's recommended that every user has their own login user identity. And also, if you're going to be accessing devices for lower profile utilization, such as multimedia, or even just backups in some cases, I would create sub-users, and I'll show you in a later video how to create multiple users. I'd create individual users and accounts with their own access level for those. But for now, go ahead and create this control user account name and password. Next up, set the date and time on the system there. You can use local area NTP pools to find out the time and the date, but it should be able to find it pretty automatically anyway, and you can select how you want the configuration. And just so you're aware, I don't want to get all Boston Tea Party and who won the war and who lost the war, but it goes day, day, month, month, year, year. There, I said it. From that, you can go ahead and select whether you want the time on the system to be automatically updated, you know, summertime, that sort of thing. And apart from that, go ahead and click Next. From there, you'll see that the network interface you've connected with is shown. If you have multiple network interfaces connected, all of those will show their own IP. Now, what's interesting is the choice here of an automatic IP or a manual IP. Now, a lot of you aren't going to care about this. If you're not into your network identities and you're looking for nice basic level storage, leave it at obtain IP address automatically, otherwise known as the HCP. What that does is the system, when it powers down, when there's updates, just like devices that come in and out of your home and connect via the Wi-Fi, its identity on the system can be dynamic, and that will allow the system to be easier to find if you need to access it randomly on a day-to-day basis. Whereas if you are running regular scheduled updates, if you are connecting with the NAS via connected Mac and Windows PCs, and they're going to having regular transit with the system, and you need that transmission to be steady and stable and reliable, in those cases select a manual IP address. The reason being that a manual IP address fixes the NAS's identity on the network, and therefore, although other devices may change, the NAS doesn't. Just keep in mind that if you lose that identity on the IP address, or you disconnect the system and connect it to a new network in another home or another business, that fixed IP can be problematic and will require you to go back into the Asustor manager here and change that network identity remotely in an easier way there. But for the rest of you, automatic IP allocation is probably the way forward. Next up, you can see the RAID configuration. Now on this system, sorry I got a sore throat, this system here has got 5 SSDs installed. There's a lot more slots than that, but those 5 SSDs, I've done that so I can add more SSDs later in a future video showing you how to expand the storage. But nevertheless, you can choose what RAID configuration you want. Now, in brief, a single means drives are just, it's an individual drive. JBOD, much the same thing, but with multiple drives. RAID 0 combines all the storage you've got and increases read-write performance, but at the same time, you have no failover. Data is written across all of the drives, and in the event that one of those drives dies, you lose all of your data. RAID 1 is 2 drives, which are having all of read and write activity simultaneously happening to them. The result is, not only do you get improved read-write performance, especially read performance, but on top of that, you have an up to the second copy of all of your data. However, bear in mind, because it's the same data going on both disks, you're effectively halving your storage. Finally, RAID 5 allows you to combine all of the disks, but rather than all of the data being written across them with no failover, RAID 5 provides up to 1 disk of failure protection. We've done a whole dedicated video on what RAID 5 is, but ultimately just know for this video that it provides 1 disk of drive failure. If 1 disk dies, your data is still safe and you can put in another disk and recover it. But remember, RAID is not a backup, it is merely a safety net. And RAID 6 gives you 2 disks of failure, and RAID 10 ultimately halves all of your storage and has 2 sets of disks reading and writing simultaneously, much like a RAID 1, but on a larger scale of disks. For me, I'm going to go with a RAID 5. Next up, file system. ext4 is the older file system of the two, but BTRFS does provide certain background advantages, such as easier snapshot creation with a lower resource dent on your system. Additionally, data as it passes through the system during write operations will perform consistency checks, and if the data passing at the beginning and the end of the process is not the same, it will heal that data on the fly. Then you've got shared folder duplication being a great deal quicker and lower resource consuming. Just bear in mind, BTRFS isn't quite as old as ext4, and the performance of BTRFS is just a little lower. Not much, but just a fraction lower. Go ahead and select either all the disks you want to use, or if you don't want to use all of your disks in the RAID configuration, just uncheck the ones you don't want to use. But I'm going to use all of these disks in my RAID 5 configuration. Go ahead and click confirm. Bear in mind, we are still talking about the single area of storage here that all the data is going to live on as a combined pool and volume. Later on, if you do want to create separate pools and volumes, you have that option either by adding more disks or unchecking some of these options. The way pools and volumes are handled on the Asustor platform is different to other brands, and also you can't pull these drives out and put them in another system. They are locked into the Asustor and ADM file system. Go ahead and click Initialization, and now the system will start building our RAID configuration. Because I'm using M.2 NVMe's for this, it's going to be a great deal quicker when you're using hard drives, and definitely depending on the number of drives and the complexity of the RAID, like RAID 5 and RAID 6, the RAID completion and synchronization, where it checks that the write ops are going to be as smooth as possible, will take extra time. It can take hours and even days on much, much larger scale RAID operations. But for now, I'm going to fast forward to the completion of this initialization and make our way onto the Asustor ADM desktop. Just before we finish the installation and make our way to the Asustor ADM graphical user interface, it's worth highlighting that you will be invited to create an Asustor account. Notwithstanding, this will allow you to monitor and get alerts on your Asustor NAS. It will also allow you to create a remote access encrypted tunnel via Asustor to access your NAS remotely. You will get lower performance, of course, but at the same time, at least you can allow for remote access to the NAS via mobile applications, desktop applications, and just to generally access the system configuration. Go ahead and create one if you choose, or you can skip it and register later. From there, you can see you're ready to go. Click Start, and now you're introduced into your new graphical user interface here on your Asustor NAS. Again, they will be talking a lot more about privacy, and we've got a later video talking about security protocol on your Asustor NAS, but for now, go ahead and click Continue. As you can see, the first thing it's recommending is that you change your default port. By default, your NAS will be on the port 8000. That's quite typical. A lot of NASs arrive typically with their port 8000 or 8080 or 8001. The reason being, it's a nice static default and it allows default configurations to communicate, but as it's a known and well-established and publicized port, it can lead to security vulnerability. So it is highly recommended to change that HTTP and HTTPS port to something completely unique to your own setup. I'm going to leave it as is for this video, but for you, I strongly recommend you change it. The only reason I'm not is I've got lots of hardware set up here pointed at that port identifier, and I need to maintain that for the rest of this video series. But that doesn't, nonetheless, I still highlight that you change those ports a great deal. Asustor will even go as far as to make you agree that you understand these ports are your responsibility before going further. As you can see, Asustor not only has disabled the admin account, but it also turns off SSH and SFTP connections by default as well. And I recommend not turning those on unless you severely need them. So here we are, the Asustor desktop here. This can guide you through the process if you choose. And again, if you go through it, it will log you through each of accessing the files and setting the device up for the first time. And I recommend you go through those steps yourself. I'm going to be skipping them because for this video, we want to end on how to check your storage has completed and is all good to go. Go into the Storage Manager tab, and then from there, we can see our 5 drives. Also, we can see our volume has created. There's our 4 TB volume. Additionally, there are our drives, and there is the whole storage configuration for us there. And if we choose to, we can go ahead and start creating further areas of storage once we introduce other drives. It's that straightforward. The only last thing to talk about there is in the system's settings there, you can go ahead and change a lot of those network security options if you choose to, as well as change some of the network identity, change some of the security protocol, introduce two-factor or two-step authentication, and return, if you choose, to that remote access connection so you can use Asustor's own servers to access the NAS remotely. Just keep in mind that when you first set up the device, the RAID configuration there in the background, although it looks like it's complete and you can start applying data to this, it does still have to complete synchronization where the drives and the layout of the data, it needs to be refined and reformatted there in the background. So for the first few hours of the system usage, depending on the size of your configuration, performance will be a fraction lower. But once synchronization is completed, you will get that heightened performance. And there you go. Now you've set up your Asustor NAS with the latest firmware and your storage area. In the next part in this series, we're going to be making our way into the File Explorer and creating shared storage areas. On top of that, we're going to be creating multiple extra users and showing you how to assign identity to each of those users and access to individual apps, shared folders, and more. We'll even go through the App Center as well and go through some of the recommended apps that you should go for on your Asustor configuration. But that's enough. If you want to learn more, stay tuned for the rest of the parts in this series or revisit our old videos from a couple of years ago, although a lot of that information may have changed. If you do need further assistance, head over to NAS Compares, and on the right hand side of the page you can find our free advice section and the NAS Builder. The NAS Builder will allow you to choose different needs for your data storage network requirements, and then at the end, for example, you need an office backup, AI photo recognition, and video editing. You could say that you need at least 20 TB of storage. You can go ahead and say, I want this to be a 4-bay NAS device with 1 disk of failure protection, and I've got $2,000 to pay for. Say I want it to under 5 users. Say that you only want 2.5 gigabit Ethernet connectivity. You can even add extras. And once you click Find NAS, it will suggest the NASs that best suit your needs. It's that straightforward. If you need further support, a free advice section here, which also has links to recognized authorities in the subject of NAS, community forums and more, all recognized and accessible here on that list. Or use our free advice section here, and within 3 to 5 working days, myself or Eddie will get back to you with some free support. Alternatively, use the fast track inquiry for an answer within 24 hours, or head over to Ko-Fi and Patreon to not only access our membership tier where you can get monthly regular fast support from us, but on top of that, access to early content and our monthly Zoom meetings there. Finally, you can go ahead into the Services tab and arrange a 1-hour Zoom consultation with myself or Eddie to help you with your storage setup and needs. And of course, there is our community forum as well. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you on the next video in this series.